It was supposed to be a simple overnight stay at a roadside motel. I was driving cross-country to visit my brother, and after 10 hours on the road, the dimly lit Pinewood Inn seemed like a blessing. The clerk, a gaunt man with tired eyes, handed me the key to room 213 without much conversation. His hand trembled as he passed it over, but I assumed he was just cold. The motel was nothing special. Faded carpets, flickering lights, the faint smell of mildew, but I didn't care. I just wanted sleep. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of muffled crying. It was faint at first, almost like the sound of wind slipping through a crack in the window. But as I lay there, it grew louder, more distinct, a woman's voice, sobbing uncontrollably. I checked the clock. 12:03 a.m. I sat up, listening intently. The crying wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the room next to mine. I thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was just someone having a bad night. But the sound didn't stop. It grew more frantic, more desperate. Against my better judgment, I decided to check on the person. Stepping into the hallway, I immediately felt a chill. The air was heavy, and the flickering fluorescent light at the end of the corridor made everything feel surreal. I approached room 215, the source of the crying, and hesitated before knocking. "Hello," I called out, rapping my knuckles on the door. "Is everything okay?" The crying stopped. Silence hung in the air, so thick it was suffocating. I waited, but no one responded. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hello? Do you need help?" Still nothing. Something about the silence unsettled me, but I convinced myself the person might just want privacy. I turned to head back to my room, but as I did, the crying started again. Only now it was louder, like it was coming from directly behind me. Spinning around, I stared at the door to room 215. My pulse quickened. The crying was unmistakable now, a mix of anguish and terror. I reached for the doorknob, unsure of what I was planning to do, but before I could touch it, the door creaked open on its own. The room was pitch black. I called out again, but my voice cracked. "Hello? Are you okay?" No response. I fumbled for the light switch just inside the door frame and flipped it on. The overhead light flickered to life, revealing an empty room. The bed was made, the furniture untouched. There was no sign of anyone, no luggage, no personal items, nothing. But then I noticed something. The carpet near the bed was wet, as if someone had been standing there dripping water. A faint smell of pond water filled the air. As I stepped further inside, the bathroom door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The crying started again, this time from behind the bathroom door. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but something compelled me to stay. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. When I opened it, the room was empty, except for the mirror, written across the fogged-up glass, as if someone had just been standing there. With the words, "Help me," I bolted from the room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway was empty, and the eerie silence had returned. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and didn't sleep a second that night. The next morning, I went to the front desk to check out. The clerk, the same gaunt man from the night before, gave me a knowing look. "You were in 213, right?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, too shaken to respond. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "That crying you heard, you're not the first to hear it. Years ago, a woman drowned in the bathtub in room 215. She'd been staying there with her son, but he disappeared that same night. People say she's still looking for him." I left without saying another word. To this day, I can still hear her crying in my nightmares. And if you ever find yourself at the Pinewood Inn, do yourself a favor. Don't stay in room 213. Or worse, room 215. I left the Pinewood Inn in a haze, the clerk's words echoing in my head. A drowned woman looking for her son? It sounded like something out of a horror movie, yet I had experienced it firsthand. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove away, but the eerie feeling of being watched lingered long after I was miles down the road. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that exhaustion had played tricks on my mind. By the time I reached my brother's house later that day, the encounter felt like a bad dream until I unpacked my bag. Tucked between my clothes was something I hadn't put there, a small, waterlogged teddy bear. I froze, staring at the soaked, matted fur. It smelled faintly of pond water, the same scent I'd noticed in the room. My stomach churned. I hadn't seen the bear when I packed, and I certainly hadn't brought it in from the motel. Yet there it was, sitting innocently among my belongings. "Hey!" My brother called from the kitchen. "Everything okay in there?" "Yeah," I lied, shoving the bear deep into the bottom of my bag. Just unpacking. For the rest of the evening, I tried to distract myself with small talk and dinner, but my mind kept drifting back to the bear. Where had it come from? And why did it feel like it was meant for me to find? That night, I barely slept. The air in the guest room felt heavy, oppressive. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of faint sobbing. My body went cold. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The sobbing wasn't loud. It was soft, distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside the house. I told myself it was just a wind, or maybe a trick of my tired mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The crying sounded exactly like what I had heard at the motel. I didn't dare leave the room. Instead, I huddled under the blankets, heart pounding, until the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. The next day, I decided to research the Pinewood Inn. I hadn't asked the clerk for more details, but the story of the drowning woman haunted me. With my laptop open, I searched for any information about the motel's history. It didn't take long to find a news article from 1993. A woman named Caroline Brooks had been staying at the Pinewood Inn with her 6-year-old son Daniel. According to the report, Caroline had been found dead in the bathtub of room 215, the result of an apparent drowning. Her son, however, was never found. His disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. As I scrolled through the article, my hands began to shake. Attached to the story was a grainy black and white photo of Daniel Brooks. He was holding a teddy bear, the same one now sitting in my bag. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing. This couldn't be real. Yet, I couldn't ignore the feeling that whatever was happening wasn't over. That night, I tried to convince myself that everything was just a coincidence. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again, the crying. This time, it was closer. My breath hitched as the sobbing grew louder, more desperate. It wasn't coming from outside the house. It was coming from the corner of the room. I bolted upright, my eyes darting to the corner. At first, I saw nothing. But then, slowly, a shape began to form, a faint, translucent figure of a woman. Her face was pale and gaunt, her hair dripping wet. She clutched at her chest as if in agony, her mouth moving soundlessly before the sobbing resumed. "Where is he?" she whispered, her voice a rasping echo. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Where is my son?" The air grew colder, and I felt an invisible pressure pressing down on my chest. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at me, her eyes hollow and full of despair. I don't know," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She stepped closer, her figure flickering like a dying light. "Find him," she said, her voice trembling. "He's waiting." Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving the room eerily silent. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't explain why, but I felt an unshakable urge to go back to the Pinewood Inn, to room 215. I told my brother I had to cut my visit short and hit the road. As I approached the motel, dread settled over me like a storm cloud. The clerk wasn't at the desk when I arrived, so I made my way straight to room 215. The door was unlocked, just as it had been the first time. The room looked the same, empty, unassuming. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint outline of a trapdoor in the corner of the floor. With trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing a narrow crawl space. The smell of damp earth and decay hit me like a wave. Inside, I found what the crying woman had been searching for, a small, skeletal body clutching a decayed teddy bear. My breath caught in my throat as tears blurred my vision. This was Daniel. I called the police and told them everything, leaving out the parts they wouldn't believe. The case of Caroline and Daniel Brooks was finally closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been chosen to find him. That night, back in my own bed, I woke one final time to the sound of crying. But this time, it wasn't filled with sorrow. It was a sound of relief.